The wind came low through the pines that morning, like it didn't want to wake the world too fast. Snow hadn't stopped falling all night, and now it lay heavy on the roof, on the old fence posts, on the shoulders of the mare tied up out front. A crow sat still in a bare tree, its feathers puffed, watching the slow stirring of the house where the chimney breathed out a thin line of smoke into the pale sky. Inside, the fire was down to coals, but the man rose without complaint. He always did, the same way he breathed, steady and unremarkable. He slipped into his coat, worn at the seams, and pulled on the boots that waited by the door. A second pair, smaller and muddied from yesterday's clumsy wanderings, sat beside them. The boy was still asleep in the loft, a quilt tucked under his chin, his mouth open, dreaming. The man let him sleep. There'd be time for lessons later, reading, splitting wood, brushing the horses, not necessarily in that order. The man stepped out, quiet like the snow was listening. The valley stretched wide around the cabin, mountains distant and blue at the edges, trees gathered in crooked congregations here and there. It was the kind of place a man chose when he wasn't looking to be found. He had built the cabin himself, with a back stronger than most and hands that had learned not to shake. He didn't speak much, not because he couldn't, but because life had taught him that words often stirred up more than they settled. He was 30, though the lines near his eyes told a different story. Folks in town called him the Cowboy, even though he hadn't chased cattle in 5 winters. It stuck anyway. Everything does, eventually. The boy came out later, dragging a stick behind him like it was a sword or a tail or both. He was 6, all limbs and curiosity, with a shock of hair too wild to be tamed and cheeks pink from sleep. He didn't talk as much as other children, not because he was shy, but because he listened first. That morning, though, he tugged at his father's coat and pointed toward the ridgeline. There was a sound. Faint and unsure, like something that didn't want to be heard. They froze, both of them. The man tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing. The wind came again, then broke against the trees, and in it came something else, thin, almost human. It came again. He motioned for the boy to stay back and stepped toward the horses, already saddling the buckskin mare without a word. The boy followed without being told, small boots crunching behind. He knew better than to ask where they were going. The man didn't answer questions until he had answers of his own. They followed the sound past the frozen creek and through a thinning grove of trees, where the snow was shallow but the cold deeper. The sun was up now, dim through the clouds, casting everything in shades of gray and silver. That's when they saw it. A wagon, broken down and leaning, its wheels sunken into the mud beneath the snow. It had been left there, and not long ago. Steam still rose faintly from the traces where horses had once been, though they were gone now. The man slowed his horse. The boy came alongside on foot, too young to ride alone yet but brave enough to try. He pointed again. Behind the wagon, there were figures. Still. Too still. 2 women, bound hand and foot, their dresses torn, skin pale where it showed through. Snow clung to their lashes, to their hair, to the corners of their mouths. The man didn't speak. He dismounted, slow and cautious. His boots crunched loud in the quiet. The air felt thick, like a held breath. He knelt beside the closest girl. She couldn't have been more than 22, her face soft even beneath the cold. Her lips moved, but the sound didn't come. Her hands were red with cold, fingers curled stiff in the rope that held them. The boy stepped forward then, his voice soft but clear. "We should help them, Daddy." The man looked at his son, then at the women again. There was risk. Always was. This could be bait, a setup, trouble in the making. But the boy's voice had landed deeper than any doubt. And maybe something else had stirred, something long buried. A memory of a different winter. Of a woman with tired eyes and kindness left to give, even when the world had given her nothing back. He cut the ropes with his knife, careful not to startle them. The older one gasped as she was freed, then sagged forward, clutching her arms to her chest. The second, smaller, with wind-chapped cheeks and dark hair matted to her brow, blinked slowly as if unsure she'd been rescued or just pulled into a different kind of storm. They didn't ask questions. Didn't beg or explain. The boy took off his coat without being told and wrapped it around the younger girl's shoulders. It dwarfed her, but she smiled faintly. Not the kind that reached the eyes, but the kind that was still brave enough to try. Back at the wagon, the man lifted them one at a time onto the saddle, steady and gentle. The boy rode with him, wedged between the women, small hands holding the saddle horn. The older girl leaned forward, her head resting against the cowboy's back. The younger one looked down at the boy as he looked up at her. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was brittle as frost. He just nodded. The ride back was quiet, but not empty. Inside the cabin, the fire was stoked again, and hot broth steamed in chipped bowls. The girl sat wrapped in blankets that smelled of cedar and ash. The boy stayed near them, occasionally touching their hands to make sure they were real. The man didn't ask who they were. Not yet. He let them eat. Let them thaw. The questions could come later. Outside, the snow still fell. Inside, something had shifted. The cabin had always been a shelter. Now it was something else, an answer to a question no one had spoken aloud. That night, the boy curled up near the hearth, dreaming of wagons and wolves and warm hands. The man sat by the window, watching the dark, listening for anything that didn't belong. He didn't know what the girls would bring with them, trouble, sorrow, or just the kind of silence that speaks of loss. But he knew this. He had stayed away from people for a reason. And now, people had found him anyway. Maybe the world wasn't finished with him after all. And maybe, just maybe, neither was love. The storm passed overnight, leaving behind a world quieted by snow and thick with breathless cold. Morning light crawled in slow through the cabin windows, slanting golden across the floorboards where 2 pairs of borrowed boots dripped melted frost into dark puddles. The fire hadn't died, he'd kept it going, waking every hour to feed it, like it was something fragile and half alive. The boy was the first to stir, as always. He shuffled across the floor still wrapped in a blanket, hair tangled and eyes full of morning dreams. He climbed up onto the bench beside the hearth and sat watching the flames, as though they might speak if stared at long enough. One of the girls, the older one, woke next. Her back was to the room, shoulders hunched beneath the old quilt. She didn't move much, but the tension in her body made it clear she'd never really fallen asleep. The younger one opened her eyes just after. She sat up slowly, her hair falling in loose, messy ropes around her face. There was a rawness in her features, not from cold or fear, but from holding too much in for too long. She caught the boy watching her and gave him a small nod, as if they'd already exchanged something more honest than words. He handed her a tin cup of water without speaking. The cowboy was outside feeding the horses. They'd grown used to his rhythm. He always left early, boots crunching in the snow, jacket pulled tight against the wind. He never slammed the door. Never raised his voice. Everything he did was deliberate, even the silences. When he returned, the girls were both sitting up, their eyes following him with caution, not fear. He brought in more wood, set it beside the hearth, and poured coffee into a tin mug before settling down across from them. Still, no questions. Not yet. It was the younger girl who spoke first. We weren't supposed to survive the night. Her voice was quiet, but not weak. There was a note in it that said she hadn't given up, only been forced to wait. The older sister looked away, lips pressed tight. It was her who had the anger in her, while the younger one carried something softer, like sorrow that hadn't hardened all the way. The man nodded, not asking what she meant. Just letting the truth settle where it would. They had been left behind, they said. Not by accident. Their uncle had tied them and gone with the wagon team, promising he'd be back with help. He never came. What for? The man asked. Debt, the older one said flatly. He said we cost too much to feed. Said we were more trouble than we were worth. The younger one added, her eyes never leaving the boy, he wanted to trade us for a winter supply run. 2 girls for 3 barrels of grain and a saddle horse. Someone offered him that much, and he took it. The boy didn't understand the weight of those words, not yet. But he slid a little closer to the younger girl on the bench, pressing his shoulder to hers like warmth was something he could offer, and maybe it was. The man stared into the fire for a long time. You got names? The younger one answered. She said hers first, quiet and simple, and then her sister's, whose name came out like a dare. The man gave his own in return, just the one name, and said folks in town used to call him Cowboy, though he didn't care for it. The boy, he said, was just called my son most days. The boy grinned at that and stuck out his hand toward the younger girl. She shook it solemnly, like they were making a pact. The sisters settled into the rhythm of the cabin slowly. The older one kept her distance, doing chores in silence, eyes always on the door. The younger one moved more gently through the space. She folded the boy's clothes without being asked. She brushed the mud from the boots by the fire. She sang under her breath while she swept the floor. She never asked to stay. Neither did her sister. But the question lingered between them all, unanswered and unspoken. One morning, the man caught her out by the fence, sleeves rolled to her elbows, mending a broken hinge with wire she'd found in the barn. He watched her work a while before speaking. You don't owe me anything, he said. She paused, then answered without turning. I know. But you stayed anyway. So did you. Their words hung in the cold between them, something fragile and forming. She turned then, looking him in the eye for the first time without flinching. You're the first man who didn't want anything from us. He didn't answer. Not because he didn't have words, but because he knew words like that deserved stillness in reply. That night, the boy asked if they could all stay for good. Just like that, curled up in his blanket, eyes half closed. The cowboy didn't answer right away. He looked across the cabin, where the sisters were sitting together near the fire. The older one was stitching a tear in her sister's sleeve, her face softer now, tired but not as tight with fear. The younger one caught his gaze and held it a second longer than before. "We'll see," he finally said, ruffling the boy's hair. Later, when the cabin had gone quiet and the fire was dimming, the younger girl lingered near the window. The snow had stopped falling. Stars poked through the night like pinpricks of old promises. She turned toward him, her voice low, like she was afraid the dark might overhear. "Do you think people like us ever find places we're allowed to stay?" He looked at her, at the shadow of someone strong pretending not to be tired, and answered carefully. "Sometimes the world don't make room for the right kind of people." She nodded slowly. "But sometimes," he added, "we make our own place, if we stay long enough to shape it." She didn't smile, not quite. But something in her eased. She turned back toward the window, and he left her there, knowing some quiets aren't meant to be broken. In the days that followed, the rhythm held. The cabin became fuller without growing crowded. The boy laughed more. The horses warmed to the younger girl's voice. The older sister, though slow to soften, no longer looked at the door as if it were a noose. Nothing had been said aloud. No promises made. But the snow had started to melt around the edges of the porch. The creak ran louder now. And deep inside the cabin, something else had begun to thaw. Spring came slowly to the valley. The snow didn't leave, it receded, inch by inch, like something reluctant to let go. The trees stayed bare, but the wind softened. Icicles dripped into the soil. Buds gathered on branch tips like shy thoughts not yet spoken. The cabin remained, weathered and constant, but the air inside it had changed. The boy sang more now, nonsense songs made of half-words and whistles, and the younger sister, she hummed along. He followed her like a colt to its mother, watching everything she did, how she sliced carrots with the dull knife, how she folded their blankets with her palms flat, how she braided her sister's hair in the evening without saying a word. She never corrected him when he got in the way. Never told him to hush or stop asking why. Instead, she let him linger beside her. She let him help. She let him belong. The older sister still rose before dawn, as though suspicion had its own internal clock. She'd walk the fence line each morning, boots crunching frost, scanning the woods like something might come out of them. Her shoulders stayed tight. Her eyes sharp. But even she had begun to sit at the table now, spoon in hand, eating without haste. The man watched all of it without interfering. He worked as he always had, silent, steady, present in a way that didn't call attention to itself. But the younger girl noticed. She saw the way he paused before knocking snow from his boots, so as not to wake them. She saw how he let the boy climb the fence while he mended it, even though it took twice as long that way. She noticed that when he chopped wood, he split the logs smallest first, so she could carry them without straining. It wasn't kindness that made her wary. It was consistency. She didn't know what to do with a man who never wavered. One night, when the fire had burned down to its orange bones, she stepped outside and found him sitting on the porch steps, pipe unlit, just holding it between his fingers like a habit he no longer needed. She sat beside him. Not close, but not far. The stars above were thick. The moon was thin and sharp. She pulled her shawl tighter and said, without looking at him, "I don't know what this place is yet." He took a long moment before answering. "It ain't a trap." She nodded, still not meeting his eyes. "It doesn't feel like one. But it's hard to tell the difference, sometimes, between peace and silence." He turned slightly, just enough to look at her profile. "I won't ask anything from you. That's a promise." She glanced down at her hands, fingers interlaced, trembling only a little. "What if I wanted to offer something?" His brows lifted, but he didn't speak. Just let her words drift there in the dark. She didn't say more. Didn't need to. When she stood to go back inside, she paused, her back to him. "I remember warmth, you know. Not just the kind from a fire. Real warmth. The kind that doesn't ask to be earned." He nodded once. "That kind stays longer than it should." She went inside without waiting for more. In town, a wagon rolled in the next week, pulled by tired mules and a red-faced man with silver buttons straining on his coat. He asked questions no one liked. Showed papers with names that didn't belong to him. Said he had a right to the sisters. Said they were property, collateral, his to collect. Said they owed him something. No one argued. But no one helped him, either. He left angry, dust kicking up behind his wheels, promising to return. When the man rode to town for supplies 2 days later, he heard about it. The shopkeep muttered it under his breath, eyes flicking toward the boy who waited by the sugar barrel. The cowboy said nothing. Just paid, packed, and left. But he rode home faster than he'd come. That night, he sharpened his knife with slow, even strokes. Not for show. Just for readiness. The sisters knew something had changed. The air felt different. Like thunder without clouds. The older sister was the one to say it aloud. "He's coming back." The man didn't deny it. Let him, he said. The younger girl sat by the fire that evening, brushing the boy's hair as he leaned against her knee. He was humming again, some song she didn't know. She watched the man move across the room, gathering tools, checking latches, reinforcing the doorframe. You don't have to keep us, she said quietly. He paused, eyes catching hers. I'm not keeping anyone. Then why are you risking yourself? Because someone tied you up in the cold and left you to die. And I don't let go of things that didn't deserve that. She stared at him, eyes wide and still, the boy's hair forgotten in her hand. You didn't even know us. No. But my boy did. He returned to his work. She sat frozen, the boy now snoring softly in her lap. Later that night, she came out onto the porch again. The cold was deeper now, as if sensing what was coming. She didn't sit beside him this time. She stood just beyond the step, arms crossed over her chest. If I asked to stay, past the storm, past the man with the buttons, what would you say? He looked up, expression unreadable in the moonlight. I'd say you're already here. She nodded, a small breath leaving her lips. And if I asked to matter? You already do. She blinked, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't look afraid of being seen. Inside, the fire flared, and the boy murmured her name in his sleep. The man rose, brushing snow from his coat. Tomorrow might bring trouble, he said. She stepped closer. But tonight, we still have warmth. And in the hush of the valley, where stars held vigil and the trees listened without judgment, she reached out and touched his hand. Not to pull him. Not to ask anything. Just to feel the truth of his skin against hers. And he let her. Without flinching. Without retreat. Because hearts that remembered warmth never forgot what it meant to be held gently. The sun rose low behind a curtain of fog, casting pale gold over the fields that had only just begun to green. The frost was gone, but the chill had returned, not from winter, but from something else coming up the valley road. The man felt it before he saw anything. The way animals go still before lightning. The way the boy had gone quiet at breakfast, his spoon forgotten halfway to his mouth. They heard it around midday. Hooves, slow and deliberate. Wagon wheels grinding against thawed mud. The sisters were inside, near the fire, though no one had lit it. The boy pressed his face to the window but didn't speak. He just watched. The man stepped out alone. There were 3 riders. 1 wagon. At the front of it sat a man with a wide hat and a sharper mouth, the one who'd been asking questions in town. His coat was too fine, his hands too clean. Behind him were 2 others, less polished, their holsters worn in at the edges, the kind of men paid to follow orders and point guns. The man didn't reach for his rifle. It hung inside, above the door. He didn't need it to speak. You're trespassing. The one with the fancy coat pulled on the reins and raised a gloved hand, like he was giving mercy. I've come for what's mine. You've come a long way for a lie. They stared at each other across the yard. The wagon creaked, settling like an old bone. The horses snorted, impatient. They owe a debt, the man said. Legal debt. You got no right harboring them. The boy stepped outside then. Just 1 foot on the porch. The younger woman rose behind him, not stopping him, only watching. The light caught her face, and the man in the wagon leaned forward, as if seeing her change the tone in his voice. They're mine by contract, he said. I've got the paper. I've got my land, the cowboy said, and on it, paper means nothing when it tries to chain people. The 2 hired guns shifted in their saddles. The boy didn't flinch. He stood close to the post, one hand on the rail like it might keep him anchored. Inside the cabin, the older sister had a knife clutched beneath her apron. She didn't tremble, not now. Not anymore. You plan to shoot me in front of a child? The man in the wagon asked. I don't plan to shoot anybody, the cowboy said. But I won't let you take them. That's when one of the riders twitched, fingers near his hip. The man saw it happen in a breath, and before the thought could even form into fear, he moved. 1 shot. Clean. A warning, not a kill. The bullet struck the dirt near the rider's foot, spraying mud across his boot. The rider froze, hand hovering. He didn't test the man's aim again. The wagon man's expression changed, not afraid, not yet, but something else. He was recalculating. You'll make this a war over 2 unwanted girls? The cowboy stepped forward. Just 1 step. Just enough. They're not unwanted. Not here. The wind moved gently across the field behind him. A bird cried high in the trees. No one else spoke. The man in the wagon finally clicked his tongue and leaned back. You'll regret this, he said. Maybe, the cowboy replied. But not today. He turned and walked back toward the porch, back toward the boy who hadn't moved. The little one looked up at him, proud and silent, and stepped aside to let him pass. The wagon turned slowly. The hired guns followed without a word. No shots fired. No last insults thrown. Just the sound of wheels, of hooves, of retreat. When they were gone, the man exhaled. Not from fear, but from something heavier than fear. The kind of weight you carry when you've decided something deep and final. He looked at the younger woman. She hadn't gone back inside. She stood beside the door, her hand resting against the frame, her eyes full of questions too old for her years. "You didn't have to do that," she said. He nodded. "I know. You could have let us go. I couldn't." She stepped down the stairs slowly, bare feet against the worn wood. The boy slipped back inside, giving them space, though he glanced back once, just to make sure. She stood in front of the man now, close enough to feel the wind pass between them. Her voice came soft, but steady. "What happens next?" He took a moment. Looked out across the fields, where snow had been not long ago. The green was just starting to show. "We keep going." She tilted her head. "Together? Only if you want that." She didn't answer with words. She stepped forward, touched his chest lightly with her palm, then leaned in, not a kiss, not yet, but a resting of foreheads, a quiet surrender, a recognition of all they'd survived. Inside the cabin, the older sister set the knife down. The boy added water to the sunflower seeds. The horses in the field bent their heads low to the grass, no longer searching for the cold. Sometimes a man leaves the world behind, thinking he's done with all of it, grief, danger, love. But the world isn't a thing you can run from. It finds you. Sometimes with pain. Sometimes with purpose. And if you're lucky, with both. Because some things, some people, aren't meant to be let go of. Not by good men. And not by a boy who once said, "We should help them, Daddy." He did. And in doing so, he saved more than just two women tied to a fence. He saved something in himself. And he showed the boy what it means to stay.